So up to this point, we've talked about causation, and that's a particularly important concept to be able to move into the realm of program design or logic modeling. So today we have with us some guests from North Shore Animal League of America that run a program called Mudagrees and have been working on Rikers Island with a program called Rikers Rovers that puts that together. So today we're going to talk to them and try to understand what the program's about, and based on this, you'll be able to develop your first logic model. So I'd like to introduce Jane Vitale and Kim Spagnol of North Shore Animal League of America.
Hello.
So just to begin, maybe you can speak to me a little bit about Rikers Rovers and what it's been and what it should be.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll get into Mudagrees perhaps as a
Should I
compliment.
start talking about that?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Why don't you talk about Rikers? Yes.
So maybe I should just tell you how it developed, and then that could give you a good idea of where it went and where we're hoping it will go.
Okay.
Okay?
Perfect.
So there was a program at Rikers called Rikers Rovers, and when it started, they were working with dogs from Animal Care and Control Center shelters in New York City, and they had 3 dogs go through the program cycle. So essentially, it was a dog that was taken from the shelter and lived with inmates, youth inmates, and they were taught how to train the dog using a behavioral
Sorry to
program.
interrupt. When you say lived with, what does that look like?
So basically, when the program started, there was a house of, I believe at the time it was 6 to 10 inmates, and they had 2 trustees, and the first trustee was the person who was actually living with the dog in their cell, and the second trustee was sort of their right-hand person who, made sure the dog was taken care of, was taken for walks, was safe,
Nice.
All fed, and really kind of leading the behavioral program. And I had contacted the deputy commissioner when I heard about the program just to find out more about it, because it's something, that obviously we're very interested in. And by the time we met with her, the municipal shelter had pulled out of the program. And Jane and I had spoke with her at a meeting, and North Shore Animal League stepped in. And
which was
more about that?
Yeah, it was wonderful for North Shore, because this became a non-traditional way to have dogs fostered. So it's wonderful in saving lives. These inmates would train the dog, live with the dog. It not only changed the entire atmosphere in the prison, in their house, but it also changed it for the officers. And at the same time, you're getting these dogs nurtured, socialized, trained, and usually they would get adopted by someone within the Department of Corrections, usually would adopt the dog.
CO or something.
Yes. Or they would come back to the shelter, and we would post where they had been and how they had been, who they had been trained by, and instantaneously the phones would ring. Families would come in to take these dogs.
So you have the dogs being trained by the inmates?
That's correct, in conjunction with Rikers Rovers.
Okay.
Okay. The Department of Education actually has a behaviorist that they actually have just hired now full-time. So she's in there working all the time. We visit once a week. We would visit once a week.
So
just to add, she was volunteering doing that for 3 years.
Yeah.
And then they hired
They
her
just recently.
full-time.
Yeah.
So what does the program look like? You said that, these dogs are fostered in these houses. Houses are like a unit, or?
Yeah, when you say house, it sort of gives this.
It seems like there's a picket fence out of
it's a
Rikers
jail.
Island.
It's a prison. It's a
Okay.
prison.
It's one of the cell blocks.
It's a cell block.
It's a cell block. They just call a cell block a house.
That's right. They call it a house. And where these dogs are, the inmates had to be thoroughly interviewed, fill out an application. They could not have certain crimes in their past if
This
they wanted
was
to.
my next question.
Oh,
No, keep going. No, this is
okay.
important.
And also, not just the inmates had to be interviewed, the correction officers also had to be interviewed. They also installed multiple cameras so that the dog could be seen at all times. And
Oh.
they actually added staff as well to this house to help with the dog. And they actually put a social worker in there.
Because
And just as an aside, there were over 200 applicants. These are all teen inmates.
Yeah.
There were over 200 applicants for this
For the dog.
program.
And there's only a handful.
but I would be afraid for the dog's safety.
So that is number one concern,
Okay.
is the dog's safety, which is why the interview process is quite entailed. It is rigorous, and that's why too we wanted the officers to even have some sort of have experience with dogs, or just a natural love of dogs, wanting to do this. And the extra cameras that were installed also. And actually, as an added precaution, we no longer had the dog staying in a cell. We brought the dog out, so at night he was in a crate in the hallway and not just in a jail cell, to just eliminate any sort of problem or controversy, which happens a lot at Rikers.
Okay. Now the dog could go in the cells though with the kids.
The dog did, but not really. There's a community room.
Right.
There's a community room where they did all the work with the dog, but they also built a dog run so that they would bring the dog outside as well into the dog run.
So they would take the dog out. Do they have responsibilities to take care of the dog in different ways, or is that dealt with by the staff?
The wonderful thing about it, these inmates, these youth that barely would talk to one another, and if they did, it was usually in fighting. It was a lot of, I guess, would you say, ego that it was involved with these kids. I mean, how can I even say the boredom? That's the thing about jail. These are young kids in a prison that is not, there's nothing pretty about it. They're on an island by the airport. So all these kids do, can you imagine looking out the window and seeing flight after flight of all the places to be by the airport? Imagine just looking and watching people take off, and you're in prison. So by bringing a dog in there, it alleviates the boredom. They start working together. They make decisions together. The fighting stopped within the prison where the dogs were. They had to become strong, because when they did go out for their time, recreation time, they take so much abuse and so much flack from the other inmates, because a lot of the other inmates are jealous.
Oh, they want the dog.
They
as
want
well.
to be in the program, or they may just hassle them for taking care of the dog. These inmates, you saw them become so protective and band together as a group to protect the dog and to protect the program.
Then what happens to the dog? They're just permanently assigned to these.
Well, what
They're
happened?
permanent fosters for.
No. And that's a difficult thing that we worked with and talked about, because we thought, is this a good idea, really? Because these kids are suffering. People have let them down.
Mhm.
Now you're going to give them a dog that they're going to get attached to, and then you're going to take it away from them.
Oh, so you just come in and take the dog after a certain
Well,
amount of
we
time?
went in, and after 6 weeks, because after the main thing is to get this dog adopted, to get a permanent loving home for this dog.
Of course.
So we went in, and they do. They get very, very attached. But when we go in, we tell them, you have an important job to do. And that is to find this dog a home. And that means you're going to love it, you're going to train it, and then you have to let go. But that's social emotional learning.
Yes.
So we bring that back to behavior and to growing up and to maturing and what it is to love and to be responsible and loyalty and trust, and then to have to let it go. And they do it. And we see them. One of the dogs went out in the dog run and hurt its paw, just had a little cut on its paw.
Uh-huh.
And we had to take the dog back because we had to be seen medically. These guys that, like, you see them walking down the street, you'd kind of be like, whoa, weeping because the dog was hurting.
Wow.
And, they wanted to go take the dog, but we brought the dog back to them once it was healed. But just amazing.
And then how do you pick where the dog goes after the Rikers experience?
Well, so far, most of them have gotten adopted through officers at Rikers.
Oh, the officers are.
It's happened, but what they do, if that doesn't happen, the dog comes back to the shelter, to North Shore Animal League America. We do PR, we do, Facebook, social media.
Wow.
We do a sign in the shelter by the cage. I mean, the dog was gone the next day because we
It's
actually
a fully
had
trained dog.
fully
Yeah.
trained dog, and we had a family come in. The families that come in and adopt these dogs, they love the program. They love the fact that the inmates, the dog had been at Rikers, trained by the inmates.
And in terms of the Rikers Rovers program, and I don't know if it continued or not after, but the
Mhm.
inmates are part of the adoption process. So they were reviewing, the applications of the adopters, and a lot of them were the COs that they were, with every day.
They get to choose.
So they got to choose. They had to, look at people's histories, their finances, and they had to determine if they could actually take care of a dog. So that was a big part of it. And also another big part of it is that the inmates have to work together as a team to determine, the scheduling of taking care of the dog
Mhm.
and who is going to walk the dog at 5 in the morning and what responsibilities will be allocated. So that's another opportunity for them to be part of the whole process, to learn those skills as well.
So you have the living component with the dog, and you mentioned earlier, Jane, the training of the dog with the behaviors. Are there any other activities that go into the Rikers Rovers experience?
Well, that's part of what we're working on now.
Okay.
There are a lot of prison animal programs around the country. Probably every state in the United States has at least one program like this. Yet there's really not any clear guideline for best practices for these programs. Usually there are, someone like the deputy commissioner who is interested in starting Rikers Rovers
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
they are aware there's more research and, more science backing up, the fact that animals and humans working together and that human-animal bonds really is a strong component to teach social emotional learning. So they grab onto that.
Right.
Yet, they don't really know exactly how to implement a program like that all the time. So one of the things that we would really like to do is to see what the program is like and measure the program just as it is, as an animal living with the inmates and having the training and them learning the behavioral training, which helps them, and then we want to see how that goes, but then add the component of direct social emotional learning through the Metagrease curriculum.
So I think I heard you say that social emotional learning sort of happens a little bit naturally in this process. You're
does.
saying also you want a direct curriculum that supports that.
I'll give you an
process.
example. When we went to speak with some of the inmates who were in one of the program cycles, and one of the questions we asked was, what else would you need, to make this program even better? Because they really loved the program. And that was when one of the inmates said that because their behavior is a requirement for them to stay in the program, that they were being tested by other inmates to try to get them in trouble so they would lose their opportunity to be in the program. And he said, we really need help with anger management, right? Because he didn't want to,
Be
become
provoked.
out of control and lose his opportunity, yet, he needed support
Extra
with that.
How to deal with it.
Right.
How to deal with that.
Right.
That's right.
What would you, and just building off what you're saying, what would you both say are the goals of the program? Jane, you've already mentioned a number of things that could be happening, but what would you say the program's supposed to achieve if you were to
Well,
narrow it down?
one of the things that's been wonderful, we've heard two stories where when they went to court, because you have to remember too, Rikers, they're just waiting there. If they came from a background where they had the money to pay their bail, they wouldn't even be in there.
Right.
And they get caught up in the system too. The system is long and arduous, and some fall between the cracks. And so they're waiting. They just go back and forth to court from Rikers. So we heard two stories where the judge, they were actually released based on their behavior in the program.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
you'd say behavioral change is something That's a goal.
I mean, the goal is to make not make these naturally, to have them learn through this that they're going to go back into their community and be good citizens, and not just be good citizens, but to actually be proactive. Through this program, you can see them angry and wanting. I mean, they come from neighborhoods where it's a status symbol and it's protection and it's money if you belong to a dogfighting ring.
Ugh.
So they're learning that like they don't even know that that's wrong. You know, we've been in there, and we talk about, you know, how you have to be a responsible citizen, and when you see wrong, you have to the social justice that you are responsible for. And they're like, well, that's ratting. We belong to a gang. That's not that's ratting if I do that. We said, but you also belong to your community. And you have a responsibility to your community to keep it safe, to contribute as members who are positive and going to make change and make things happen. They didn't even see that. Like that hadn't even occurred to them because they're so busy, are so, it's just, you could talk better than that, you know, to that
And I
came,
think there's multiple benefits, you know, in
yeah.
terms of goals.
Yes.
I think, you know, we want to
Yeah.
we want to focus on goals for the
Mhm.
inmates, right? We want them, we want to see behavioral changes. We want to empower them. We
Mhm.
want them to become critical thinkers. We
Okay.
want them to be, you know, have more
That's it.
emotional regulation,
Okay.
right?
Mhm.
So that's
Mhm.
one piece. And then there's benefits for the dogs because in New York City alone, 35,000 animals are surrendered to our municipal shelters every year, and many of them don't come out. They're euthanized because there are not proper homes for them. Sometimes it's because of lack of training, which this program can solve very easily. Sometimes there are abuse cases, many times cruelty and neglect. And it is not lost on these inmates, you know, that these animals are unwanted and being warehoused, and they have a connection to that,
That's
and they relate
interesting.
to that.
Oh, yeah.
And another
That's really
piece
interesting.
that's really important is the correctional officers who work with them. And the officers will say that, you know, they feel so lucky to be able to be part of the program when they're working directly with the program, but there are also officers from other houses and other cell blocks will come to
Mhm.
spend time with
the
the dogs and the inmates. And I have to say, you know, I've been in a lot of correctional facilities and I have never witnessed correctional officers talking about the inmates they worked with in the way that these people did.
Yeah.
When they immediately piped up, when we asked them about their perception of the program, and they said, you know, we thought we would have to be on them to do their tasks and, you know, activities and take care of the dogs. And they were the first ones to say, we're so proud of them. They are amazing. It was just a really a great opportunity
They're
to
getting
just
a
have
sense of
that
responsibility
Yeah.
from working with the dog.
Yeah.
and for the COs to recognize
It
that.
changes the dynamic, not just for the prisoners, but for the officers who are in an extremely stressful situation.
I can imagine.
And I do want to just add that, you know, in terms of animal cruelty and neglect, you know, as Jane said, a lot of the inmates have experienced, you know, maybe animals only as guard dogs or, you know, dogs in fighting rings and dog fighting. Many young people are recruited into dog fighting as a way to make money.
And they're the ones that would end up in this program probably.
Well, you know, it's interesting because in terms of screening, you know, right now, I think that there's a lot of care given into making sure that there is not a history of animal abuse or violence.
Right.
But I think that that's the very population that we really want to reach. So we have to be really careful about how to do that because the dog safety is really important.
Right, if that's their exposure to dogs, that they may be mean to the dog then.
And you want to make sure, I mean, there's a lot of elements to look at and consider because, you know, I don't think that maybe a history of, you know, animal abuse, you know, is not exactly the right thing in this context. I mean, they have to be highly monitored and maybe brief interactions, but I still think it's a really helpful thing to do because these are the people who you want to have the intervention because you don't want them to continue those cycles of violence. They are, you know, and I just have to say that, you know, this is all connected, right? So we know from research, you know, there's no question about it that violence against animals is perpetuates violence against humans, and it is all connected. If you can hurt, a sentient being, whether they're a non-human animal or a human, it's all the same.
So creating the connection to the animal, you said human-animal bond, correct? Doing that, just there's empathy for the dog, I guess, is something that's happening here.
Absolutely.
Right, cultivating empathy,
and
cultivating
that becomes
compassion,
and resiliency.
Yes, compassion. That
right.
all comes from that, just
connection.
naturally
It
through
really
that connection.
does. And it's what was the point you had said too? That now I forget what you were going to say. There was something
the abuse
there's
and
a-
neglect, the
yeah.
cruelty aspect.
and the connection with the dog.
And
I'll think
also,
of
a lot of these inmates, they have had traumatic experiences, and
That's what I was going to say.
they've experienced abuse and neglect.
Right.
Many of them have been forced to abuse their own animals by adults in their lives. Though many of them have experienced sexual abuse. They various types of abuse that who is more vulnerable, than a young person, other than a non-human animal who's had that experience.
And that's exactly what I wanted to say is they relate. We go in, we tell them the journey of the rescued dog. This dog would have been dead. It was going to be killed. It was going to be euthanized. And this dog might have come from a puppy mill, or it's been in a shelter, or it was left on the street, or the dog was abused. They immediately...
It's a social justice issue.
They just connect because they relate. And now they're not, as I would say, they're no longer a child with a problem. They're a trusted caretaker.
And a hero.
And
they're rescuing.
That's right.
I have to say this, one thing about empowering youth through these kinds of programs, including this type of animal-assisted therapy, service learning programs, is that problems for animals are typically created by humans. And that's why they're easier for us to solve. We want to empower them to solve problems for people, problems for the environment, problems for all animals, not only dogs, all animals. And this is a kind of good way to have that happen, because they can see that they can make changes where maybe it's a little more difficult to solve problems for humans.
See that they make changes comes from what aspect of this program, do you think?
Well, all of this, is related to empowerment and seeing how you can be a voice for the voiceless.
Well, they see that the dog gets adopted. They see a dog that comes in that is frightened, not social, and looking to them, like people have let them down and they haven't been able to trust people. Now you have this innocent, vulnerable creature looking to them for direction that they give, that they care for. And then the dog, so that's what they see.
You're reminding me of something else, too, that's really important. A lot of the inmates, particularly at Rikers, have, a lot of, despite the emotional regulation piece, difficulty, with social skills and reading social cues and perception, of others and perspective taking. And dogs are experts at reading human social cues. They've had to survive. We've had them as our companions for thousands and thousands of years, and the ones that
they can read how you're feeling when you come in the room.
Right.
That's
they depend on us for their
Right.
life, for their food, for their treats. So they know how to read us very well, and they're very good models for teaching social skills.
They don't judge. These kids, they've been judged. They're being judged. These dogs aren't judging them. They don't care where they live. They don't care. All they care about, they pick up on energy. And dogs pick up on energy. And all they care about is trust, loyalty, and respect.
And you feel that just by interacting with the dog, you said they're models. They just learn, the kids learn that intuitively, or this is why you want to add another component to the program?
I think they learn that through the behavioral component as well, because they're learning about essentially antecedents and behaviors and consequences, right? When they're teaching a dog how to do something, and then they learn how to give the dog a treat immediately after, and they can see how that behavior is shaped. We learn the same way. So that's one way of teaching it, and then also through the social emotional learning curriculum of the Mud Agrees program is also a way to enhance that. And that's what we're interested in, is because, yes, a lot of these things will happen incidentally. And what we really want to create is a best practices model so that these programs could really, be utilized in a way that we know can really take full advantage of everything they have to offer.
And that's where the Mud Agrees comes in. North Shore Animal League of America has a Mud Agrees program that is specifically social and emotional learning. Correct?
That's correct, bridged with humane education.
Okay, and you see how that could fit in this model of animal
Yes,
assisted therapy.
absolutely.
How do you see that working?
Well, a lot of people, we all know the benefit of the dog. Everybody knows when you pat a dog, it feels good, and we know that. So,
And the science behind that.
yes, yes. Do you want to talk a little bit about this?
We should before we
Okay,
end. but keep
okay,
going.
okay. And we want to take it a step further. So so it's not just a feel good moment. We want to make this last a lifetime. So by wrapping the social emotional learning component around it, they're with the dog, but you're constantly making the connections back. And as you talked about, like they learn that there's consequences to their actions. So they can't be loud because now the dog would be frightened and coward. They can't move abruptly, so now they have to learn how to regulate. They learn to regulate their emotion, and so cognitively and physically, because of the effect on the dog, and that transfers now back to how they're going to interact with people.
Beautiful. So in a sense, it's an application space for them to take what they're getting naturally through the dog
Experientially.
and actually
Yeah.
get it themselves. That
Mhm.
okay, in my life, this means this, and this is how it works.
And they have a task. I mean, to care for a dog is work, and you can't half care for the dog. You have, like you had said, a schedule. They have to figure it out from beginning to end how this dog is going to survive with them. So they have to figure how to task. They have to be on task, and they know there's consequences if something is left out. They also, it's not all fun and games. That dog is going to poop and pee. They have to clean it up. The dog's going to throw up. The dog's going to be up in the night sick. They're with that dog.
And this Mud Agrees component, or the added complement, that would be a number of lessons. How do you see that?
So
that
it
working?
is. It is. It's a number of lessons that we would look to go in and do with them. It's also just a way of, as Kim and I always say, it's a way of talking that's sort of been taken out of our day to day. I think just with technology, with the pace that we're moving at, with even the media. As I say, youth today. You ask them what they want to be when they grow up, and it's, I want to be rich and I want to be famous. So these reality TV shows, this
Kardashians.
celebrity, these, sing a song and get rich quick, they think that's life. And now we've come to accept mediocrity, and it's acceptable. So we want to teach them that to go beyond that,
Yeah,
that
and you bring up another good point, that it also really gives an opportunity for them to see careers that they might not have thought about, working
This
with
is
animals.
through the program itself of Mud Agrees. Okay.
Yeah, just, realizing that there's, other things that they can do vocationally with animals that maybe they haven't thought of before, and something that they might like.
That's right.
And just in terms of the science piece of it, I just want to make sure we talk about that a little bit.
It gives them hope. What you're talking about is that what we talk
Right.
about, how it's really a piece, social, emotional. It's giving them a window instead of being pushed up against a wall, that they do see some hope, that there's things that that they can be really good at and really make a difference.
Absolutely.
I love it, and all the time it's being applied to the real world setting with the dog.
Right.
Yes.
That's right.
Exactly. And then just, physiologically what happens when we interact with animals, and the reason that, animal assisted therapies are so effective is because we release oxytocin when we are with animals. There's been studies that have been done that show when we're with dogs that our brains release oxytocin, and so do the dog's brain. So it's a mutual kind of
It just
affection.
feels good.
It's a feel good thing. Yeah. So
It's a synchronization of hormonal states for
That's
both.
right.
For both.
Right,
Right, for
exactly.
both.
Serotonin is released.
Yeah.
It's all
And the cortisol goes down,
exactly,
which is what the
stress reduction.
Yeah, the one of the prisoners said, because we talked to them, how do you feel about the dog? And he said, when I came in, I was having horrible anxiety attacks, panic attacks, and he said, I'm not having them now with the dog.
Wow. That's interesting.
And obviously, jails and prisons are stressful settings. for everyone.
So sorry to just get back into the mechanics, but the Mudagrees component is, you said a number of lessons, Jane. How many lessons would you
Yes.
have to complete for it to be successful, and what does it look like?
Yeah, well, there's 5 themes. It's based on 5 themes: achieving awareness, finding feelings, encouraging empathy, cultivating cooperation, and dealing with decisions.
Okay.
And we like to do that in sequence because you need to first be aware before you can then start to identify feelings and down the line. So we would want to do that in sequence. Each lesson's about 30 minutes, but as I would say, it's just a way of talking. So you can familiarize. We can do lessons with them, but we can also go in and not that they're sitting writing lessons. We go in and talk to them and show them the connection. You know, you work with them with the dog. How do you think the dog is feeling? Well, if you saw your friend feeling that way, what would you do?
How would you
And-
do it in the real world?
Yes.
Yeah.
And then how do you know he's feeling that way? Well, of course, that's body language. And well, how do you feel when you go? Just how you walk down the street. They need this. They're used to being in their neighborhood where they have to have a certain, way of walking, a certain way of talking. So we try to make them experience what they themselves, who they are, what they're practicing, and what they practice is what really convey who you are. You are what you do, you are what you say, and then how the world views you is that. So that's all part of the curriculum, and it's all done via the dog and then bringing it back to them.
Yeah,
But it's magnifying, correct, everything that's happening with the dog. So you may get some of these behavioral outcomes just with the dog and that experience, but adding in this component of social emotional learning through Mudagrees, you're amping it.
yeah, that's what we want to
Is-
find
is-
out.
is-
Mm-hmm.
I think I would say for the most part, programs like this don't have that direct, social emotional learning component. It's a byproduct
This could be the best
of
practice
it.
that
Right.
would
Exactly. So
emerge.
that's
Right.
what we want to know. That's
Yeah.
what we want to find out.
Okay, great. I have one last question, and that would be, you don't have to give me an evaluation design. You've given me the key outcomes you would see, but if you were to give me a sentence or two about how you would evaluate this, what would be the most important outcome, and how you would measure it, what would you say? Of all those things that you've mentioned today.
I think I'll just say this,
Yeah.
you can add on. I think in terms of the inmates, there's different outcomes, that will happen for, the officers, for the animals, as we talked about. If we're talking about the inmates, I would say, cultivating compassion and
Compassion would be a big measure.
cultivating
Mhm.
compassion and, really, really being engaged citizens, and just really learning, what their values are and how to express them and even identify them. When we're with animals, they learn about people too. And, who do we want to be? Who do we want to bring that to?
Mhm.
And I would also say, that if you can imagine a situation where you have, we have the biggest population of people incarcerated in the U.S., and we have a lot of animals suffering too. And if there was a way to, bring that together, and where, prisons and jails could become, foster homes for all these animals in need, it's such an effective community solution, to a multi-level problem.
Right.
So we can't leave that out of the equation in an evaluation. It's got to also.
I think that's a really important
Oh, that's a key.
piece of
Key,
it.
and I agree with everything Kim said. We would want to see these youth go out into the world and finally realize, who do I want to be in this world and what do I want to do. And when they start to think about that, they really want to be good. They're good people in bad situations.
Of course.
A lot of them. A lot of them.
Absolutely. And I'd also say, if it was possible, in terms of a model to evaluate what's happening, is that it would be really amazing to know how the correction officers, are benefiting, and how that maybe, affects their stress and their ability to stay on their job and their ability to manage their own emotions. Because when you're working with, populations that are also, highly stressed and reactive, that people feed off of each other too.
Mhm.
So the climate, we
Yeah.
see it change.
We've been in for lockdowns. We've been in many times where there's lockdowns, you cannot leave. you're there, but that's because violence has broken out or
Mhm.
something has happened.
So it would be amazing to see people, really successfully be able to leave those situations as inmates and not return,
That's right.
reduce recidivism.
Mhm.
Would you want, in creating this best practice, to evaluate outcomes without the added component of muddigrays added on and compare it to the one that where you've got both happening? Would that be useful, or is it best just to do it all together? In your
We want to do it first without. We would like to do it first without muddigrays.
that makes sense.
Yes, and just have the dog in there because we want to demonstrate that now, okay, we're going to take it a step further, teaching social emotional learning, teaching to the whole child, as
Yeah,
they
yeah,
say,
yeah.
and see if that actually does have a greater impact, which I believe
Which I would
I've
imagine. I
seen
would imagine.
it does. But would you agree with that,
Yes, and
Karen?
I think it would be really informative to know what exactly, like you were asking, how many lessons does it take? Well,
Yeah.
would it
What's the
really,
dose? What
we don't
what do we
what's the
need?
Right, and I
dosage?
never
You know,
really,
those
that's
and
a
I
lessons.
didn't
huge
answer. Yeah, and I
question.
didn't answer that. I mean,
In all of this work.
Yeah, I mean, they say even one time a week is going to have effect, but if you can do it every day,
Yeah.
and like I always say, it's a way of talking. You don't have to be sitting actually teaching a lesson, but if you understand what social emotional learning is, you can practice it every minute of the day and everything that you do. It's how you approach.
Which is where you want to get.
Mhm.
And also, do you have to go through the sequence that Jane you described?
Yes, the way
those
that
kind
this
of
was
things.
written by Yale School of the 21st Century was
Okay.
for it to, it's beneficial to do it in sequence. Now, it's not that you have to finish the first theme, then go to the next theme. You could pull one lesson from, the first theme and then pull another lesson from the second theme.
I
And,
see.
but you'd want to start there because
And
working
there's been research done on that.
yes, oh yeah, it's
to
research
know
based.
that
Yeah,
that's effective.
that's right.
Okay.
But not with this population.
Well,
Yeah.
this has been immensely helpful. Is there anything we didn't touch on that you think we should?
I don't know.
Akumi,
is
do you
there
wanna-
anything? Do you want
wanna
to
step
add
in
anything,
and-
Akumi? You good?
We have someone else
sure?
from North Shore Animal League of America that's been involved with the program. His name's Akuni. So that's who we're
Akumi
talking.
Nakajima.
That's who we're
Yes.
talking to over on the side. So
And-
you think we covered the basis of what you
I
think it's all
I
about?
think so too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
I'll just say, because this is something that we both really care about. There's really a lot of opportunities, to teach social justice issues and social and service learning, to really empower a lot of the youth, because they are feeling very.
I'm glad you ended with
disempowered.
that because you'd also mentioned humane education. So you got social emotional learning. We've talked a lot about
Right.
humane education as this social justice piece. That
That's
has
right.
to be
Humane education
Part
is
of this.
essentially, connecting human rights issues, animal protection issues, environmental stewardship, and media literacy. And how do you teach that, to young people so that they understand that we're all connected, and that you can't think of these as separate issues, and
which we tend to do.
A
which we
crossroad.
tend to do. And I'll just say, for the most part, humans care about human problems and issues, and they, if you look at people who donate or volunteer, I think the figure is 94% are for human-related issues, and environmental and animal issues are about 6% of all donations and all, and all and all volunteer hours. So it's the problem is that we are so intimately connected that if we don't see that, it's really not getting to the core of problem solving,
That's
right? It's more
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
compassion and respect and
Yeah.
empathy for everyone, and
Yeah.
that one life is not less valued than another life, whether that's comparing, an animal life, a non-human animal life, to a human life, or, amongst humans, that depending on, your race or gender or everything else, right? That one life is worth less than another life. I think that's the idea.
And that's even
You know.
amongst people to people.
Exactly.
Right? People feel they're better
Right.
because they have more. Or, it's people
Right.
do it to people,
Right.
let alone
Yeah, I
even
hear
to animals. But it's so
when you could really take this in a lot
Yeah.
of
yeah,
directions.
you can see it's more than just patting the dog in a field
Yes,
moment.
no,
There's
absolutely.
so much more.
I think they need it in the public schools almost as much, if not more. So
We
We'd love
agree.
that.
wonderful
We agree
what
with
you guys
that.
are doing.
Absolutely.
and thank you so much for your time. And the next step will be a logic model will be created by these students, and hopefully that'll be something that can benefit you as you go to seek additional funding or expand or in different
Mhm.
ways. So that's where we'll go from here.
Thank you so
Thank
much
you
for
so
Thank you
much.
so much for your
Heath.
time.
Thank
Thank
you. It was
you.
lovely. Thank you.
Wonderful.